Hi, City to City leaders. This is my talk, and it's on contextualization. Now, there's no need to do a lot of introduction for this subject. It's just so important. We all know that to one degree or another we need to contextualize, but it's also controversial. One of the City to City staff recently told me that he still thinks that when he talks to Christian leaders around the world, Christian laymen around the world, that the idea of contextualization is still seen in a very, very suspicious, people are suspicious about it, it's seen in a very negative light. One of the reasons for that is it's not that hard to see people compromising over the years in the name of being up to date with the culture. So there's many Christian leaders, as you know, in churches that have adopted a very permissive understanding of sexuality, largely because they say, well, that's where the culture is going. And there's many Christians that say, aha, there's your contextualization. Contextualization means that you just let the world tell you, rather than the Bible tell you what is true. Well, of course, if that's contextualization, I'm all against it. But that's not what the word means in mission work. It's not what the word means when we talk about it. So let's talk about what contextualization is. First of all, actually, let me start with the Bible, even before we define it. And let's notice things. In the Bible, in the book of Acts, one of the most interesting things to watch is how the apostles, when they speak, when they give their public speeches, they differ in how they present the gospel depending on the audience. One of the most important and interesting places to see that would be Paul speaking to a synagogue in Acts 13. These are people who believe the Bible, Jews and Gentiles who believe the Bible. And then you see him presenting the gospel in Acts 14, though it's brief, to a group of, you might call, blue-collar pagans who were polytheists who believed in all the gods. And then you can find him on Mars Hill in Acts 17, talking to the Stoic and the Epicurean philosophers who were, you might say, white-collar pagans. And the way in which he presents the gospel there is very different than the way he presented it in Acts 13 and Acts 14. And right away we see that the gospel presentation is adapted to different audiences. Not only do we see that in the book of Acts, we also see it in when Paul actually speaks in his own letters. For 1 Corinthians 9, he says, I have become all things that by all means I might win some. To those under the law, meaning Jews, under the Mosaic law, I have become as a Jew. But to a person not under the law, I've become as a person under the law. What he means there, again, is he's adapting. He's becoming, that is, he lives and speaks differently depending on who he's living and speaking with about the gospel. And so you do see there's a biblical reason for this idea of adapting. So let's just talk about what then contextualization is. And if I was going to give you a definition, it would be this, that contextualization is adapting to the language, to adapting the biblical truth to the language, to the culture, to the sensibilities of the audience. So it's adapting biblical truth to the culture of the audience without compromising the truth in any way. It's adapting without compromising. It's adapting so that the gospel is as compelling and as understandable as possible without compromising its truth. Another way to put it is, contextualization is not giving people the answers they want to hear. It's giving people God's answers which they may not want to hear in language and in forms that they will find most understandable and perhaps most convincing. So contextualization is adapting to the culture of the audience to be as understandable and as compelling and as convincing as possible without compromising the truth at all in any way. So what does that mean? Contextualization is more than that. It also means this. It means taking, excuse me, I'll just take a look down here. It means certainly differentiating essentials from non-essentials. This is always going to be debatable. But when you go into a culture, if you are a Christian and you're moving out into Hindu culture, you're maybe, let's say you're a Christian in Mumbai and you're trying to start a church in a kind of rural area in India where Hinduism is very traditional. When you're moving out into that new culture, you're going to have to decide what things are essential and what things are not essential. What are things that you just cannot compromise, and what are things that you can adapt to? The best illustration is not quite what I'm not going to give you cases, but maybe the best illustration is this. Here's a hymn, and the hymn has words to it, and the hymn also has a tune. What if a person says, the words are important, I don't want to change the words, but I want to change the tune, because the tune doesn't fit young people today. I want to put the words to a new tune that the young people will like. So what you've done is you come in and you take the essentials, the words, the truth, the theology, but you put it to new music, a new tune. What you're doing at that point is you're saying the tune is not essential, but the words are. Now, I mean, that even might be arguable. Some people would say, no, the tune is essential. Other people would say the words aren't essential. But see, that's the issue you have to decide. And contextualization, as difficult as that is, that's one of the things you're dealing with. But here's the most important thing to keep in mind. Contextualization is receptor-oriented, not center-oriented. It's receptor-oriented, not center-oriented. What do I mean by that? Well, if I'm the sender, I'm trying to send a message, and you're the receptor. Let's just say I'm an English speaker, and the receptor is a German speaker. And what if I say, I'm going to speak to you, but you need to learn English? So that poor person has to go and take a quick course in English, maybe a Berlitz course or something like that. Do they have them for German speakers to learn English? And then, of course, you speak, and that German speaker who doesn't really know English that well, but has just learned it, says, no, wait a minute, you're going too fast, and has to ask a lot of questions. Now, what does that word mean? What does that word mean? And so what you've done is you've put all the burden on the German speaker. So here you want to communicate across a language barrier, but you put all of the burden on the receptor. And the sender just is perfectly happy in doing what the sender does. The other thing you could do, of course, is the sender could say, you know what, I guess I need to learn German. I got to take the course. I got to, learn a good accent. And so then you learn that, and then you go and speak to the German listener, the receptor, and as you're speaking, the German receptor says, wait a minute, I don't get that word, or I can't understand your pronunciation, or wait a minute. And so what's happened is the sender has taken on all of the hard work of communication rather than putting it on the receptor. Scripturally, God is sender-oriented or receptor-oriented. He's receptor-oriented. Why did Jesus Christ become a human being? God was contextualizing to us. He says so. It says so in Hebrews 1. It says that Jesus Christ is the very expression of God's glory. We couldn't possibly see God's glory. When Moses said, I want to see your glory, God says, no, I can't choose that. He would kill you. And yet, John chapter 1 says, the Word became flesh and dwelled among us, and we beheld His glory. Glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Wait a minute. I thought God said, you can't see my glory and live. And the answer is, He contextualized His glory. In other words, God goes to the hard work. And was it hard work? Of course, for Jesus Christ to come to earth, to shed his immortality, to become subject to rejection and hunger and abuse and death. Of course it was. Look at what he had to do in order to contextualize to us. And therefore, we should not be insisting that the receptor do all the hard work, that we're going to talk about the gospel, we're going to sing about it, we're going to teach about it, exactly the way we did 100 years ago, exactly what we did in the old culture. And you're going to have to make all the effort to understand it. No, we make the effort. We, the sender, We contextualize, we incarnate, we come in. That's contextualization. That's biblical contextualization. Now, one of the questions comes up is why do it? Well, there are several reasons. There's two I'm going to mention. One is contextualization is inevitable. That is to say, you're already contextualized. Don't say, well, I don't think contextualization is a good idea. You're already contextualized. So, for example, if I preach a sermon, I want to use an illustration. Do I use a rugby illustration? Well, I can't do that because nobody out there in my congregation in Tennessee knows anything about rugby. I better use an American football illustration. See, as soon as my humor, my illustrations, the language, the vocabulary I use, all tends toward more educated or less college educated, toward people who know about American football, people who know about rugby. In other words, everything, even the way I express my emotions, everything about the way in which I'm preaching that sermon is more understandable to some people and less to others. It's more compelling and more familiar to some people and less for others. So the minute I even open my mouth, the minute I do anything, I'm contextualized. And therefore, since contextualization is inevitable, you better do it well. Because if you say, I don't want to contextualize, you're going to actually be doing bad contextualization. You can either do good contextualization or bad contextualization, but you can't not do it. The second reason why we should contextualize is because the gospel gives us resources to do it. You see, the two dangers of contextualization is always over-contextualization and under. If you over-contextualize, you compromise the truth. If you under-contextualize, the truth is not compelling or understandable. Got that? If you over-contextualize, you compromise the truth. That is what liberal churches have done when they said, hey, you know, anybody you want to love and have sex with as long as it's consenting is fine with us. That's over-contextualization, okay, to the world. But under-contextualization means that you're not looking to express the biblical truth in the most compelling, most understandable, most familiar, the way that is the most likely to connect to the listener, the receptor's heart. So over and under contextualization are your two problems. But here's how the gospel helps. You only over contextualize when you're afraid that the culture is going to be unhappy with you. So you want to fit in. You want people to like you. Well, the gospel says, who cares what people think? Who cares what the peasants think when you've got the love of the king? The gospel gives you courage, enough courage not to over-contextualize because you're secure in love. On the other hand, the gospel doesn't lead us to under-contextualize because it also humbles us and says, don't think that you've got it all together, that your culture is the right one, or that you have it all together. The gospel humbles us so that we do not under-contextualize, but it also encourages us and you might say emboldens us so that we don't over-contextualize. So the gospel helps us contextualize, and contextualization is inevitable. So let's take another quick example here is how do we contextualize? And I think I have enough time to talk to you about this. First of all, let's consider that contextualization is every part of your church, every part of your ministry. There's a little danger, and I've already fallen into it, I think, or at least I've already inclined to it, even in this talk, that when you think of contextualization, you're thinking only of communication, only of messaging. But you have to keep in mind that everything about the church needs to be contextualized. There's a section in the white paper that talks about all the dimensions of culture. There's the mythic dimension, there's the ethical dimension, the social dimension, the creative dimension. In other words, the way in which not just the way in which your communication happens, but the music, the emotional expressiveness of the worship, the way the leadership conducts itself, the way people relate to each other inside the church. All these things are if you're in a more communal culture, a more individualistic culture, if you're in a more authoritarian culture, a more egalitarian culture, you're going to be pushing against, to some degree, the culture outside, but you're going to adapt too, because that's how contextualization works. You don't give in to the idols of your culture, because cultures are always reductionistic, as we talked about under worldview. But at the same time, you're going to adapt to some degree. And you adapt to some degree because cultures are wrong in many ways, but they're also partly right. Or in many kind of times you can just adapt to a culture because that aspect of the culture is not right or wrong, but it's what we call adiaphora, indifferent. And therefore, there's really no reason why you should be always thinking of contextualization only in terms of your preaching, for example. Contextualization is actually every part of your ministry. On the other hand, let's talk about how do you actually contextualize a message so that you're the most persuasive as possible. And in the white paper, what we do is I give you 5 ideas. And those ideas have to do with how do you persuade people. And let me just go through these 5 ideas, and then I should be pretty close to being done. If you want to persuade people from a new culture or a new generation, you want to persuade them, number 1, you have to listen long and hard so that when you speak, you show them that you know their world. Some sociologists call this capital conversion. And I guess maybe I shouldn't be bringing this up because I'm getting, I don't think I have time to to explain this. But if capital is, when you think of capital, you think of money, but there's also social capital, cultural capital, relational capital. There's other sorts of assets a person has. And when you come speak to someone and you show that you know their world, you know the books that they have read, you know and you love those books. You know the music they listen to and you love that music. You know the movies they've seen and you love those movies. And you're able to use the movies and the books and the art and all that in order to make your points. You're showing that you understand what they're going through, you understand their culture, you understand their personality, you understand their hopes and their fears and their aspirations because you've entered in and you know that. That's called capital conversion, in that you are taking, you might say, cultural capital, meaning you're showing that you understand them and their culture, and you're converting it into religious capital. That's how the sociologists talk about it. You're getting them to listen to you when it comes to religion because you've shown that you understand their problems, their situation, their concerns, their objections. So first of all, you have to listen and show that you know their world. Number 2, affirm. I already said this in a way. Affirm something in their culture. Always affirm. Affirm maybe if they're criticizing the church, affirm that criticism. Affirm something that's in their culture that you know biblically you can affirm. It could be the fact that, human rights, for example. Lots of very progressive people are all about human rights. Well, we believe in the image of God. We believe that every human being, regardless of race or class, regardless of education, is infinitely precious to God. So agree with that and just say this, and even show how the Bible gives you a basis for human rights. So first, number 1, listen and show you understand the world. Number 2, affirm and agree with something in their existing belief system. Number 3, now challenge. On the basis of what you have affirmed, challenge something in their belief system. In other words, say, hey, you believe this? I believe this too. But if you believe this, why then do you believe this? That doesn't really make much sense. In other words, the best way for you to question a person's belief is not to say, it's wrong. You believe this and I don't. The best way is to say, wait, your beliefs aren't consistent. If you believe this, I don't understand why you wouldn't believe this. And so you challenge on the basis of something the person affirms. That's explained in here. And then fourth, Okay, so first is listen and show you understand their world. Number two, affirm something in their belief system. Then number three, subvert or challenge something in their belief system on the basis of what you've affirmed. Fourth, stay humble. Don't take it personally if they push back. Don't identify with your ideas. Did you hear me? When you're talking about something and somebody attacks an idea of yours, don't get all defensive as if that you're being attacked yourself. Live out of your gospel identity. So listen, affirm, challenge on the basis of the affirmation, humble yourself, and finally, redirect and show that the thing they're really looking for they can only find in Jesus Christ. So you say, look, you're all for human rights. And so what you think you're going to be needing to do and then is to just get rid of the whole idea of religion, because you think that religion gets in the way of human rights. But you realize that once you get rid of the idea of God, then what about people who say, well, human rights then are really just a product of evolutionary biology, it's a belief? I mean, in other words, how do you what is your basis for believing in human rights? No. If you really want to have a hope for the future, if you want a view of life that shows that justice is going to be done, if you want a basis for human rights, look at Jesus. He gives you the basis, he gives you the motivation, he gives you the power. In other words, the fifth thing is to always redirect to Christ. Enter their world, affirm something that they want, challenge the way in which they're trying to satisfy that affirmation, redirect it to Jesus Christ, and during the whole time, stay humble, stay calm. If they never act attacked or defensive. And that's how you contextualize the message. So that's enough for now. Please read the entire paper. It's already been through the ringer with lots and lots of other city staff have given me lots of great feedback so that I have filled it out, and I think this paper will be of great help to you. Thank you very much for listening.